Hi, everyone, and welcome to this Annie E. Casey Foundation webinar on responsible demolition and productive land reuse. If you experience technical difficulties during this webinar, visit the web address you see on the screen or send a note to the host. That's me. You can also call WebEx Tech Support at 1-866-299-3239. At any time during the webinar, you can submit questions for the presenters using the Q&A window. Make sure the Q&A icon, which you can see depicted on the slide, is blue. If it isn't, click the icon and the Q&A window should appear. We have reserved time to address questions after the presentation. Finally, I want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. We will make this recording available within the next 2 weeks on our website. And now I'll turn it over to Scott Spencer of the Annie E. Casey Foundation to provide an overview of today's session.
Thanks, Tim, and good afternoon, and welcome to today's Community Matters discussion on responsible demolition. As Tim said, my name is Scott Spencer, Associate Director for Advocacy and Influence here with the Annie E. Casey Foundation. The Annie E. Casey Foundation's Community Matters series explores the myriad and complex issues surrounding community change and the lessons we and others have learned from our work in communities around the country. To set the stage, in a time not too long ago, the population decline in America's cities resulted in abandoned homes and properties in once vibrant neighborhoods. Long-term vacancies were visual blights for communities. They deteriorated property values, they sapped community pride, and they posed threats from collapse and criminal activity. Old demolition practices also posed environmental health concerns, with lead dust and other contaminants released into the air where children played. Then, in the early 2000s, Baltimore City, through a protocol developed by the Coalition to End Childhood Lead Poisoning, now known as the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, adopted a new and more protective demolition policy. Soon, other cities, including Detroit, were learning from and adapting the Baltimore model of demolition for the betterment of their communities. For today's session, we'll hear from leaders in Baltimore and Detroit on what they've done, what they've learned, and how each city inspired the other to continue to press for a better way to support community change. We'll also hear from the Center for Community Progress, a national nonprofit that has worked with both cities in their efforts to turn vacant spaces into vibrant places. After that, we will take your questions. By the end of today's session, we hope that participants will learn more about how Baltimore and Detroit developed responsible demolition practices, and will gain insight on how to implement productive land reuse strategies. Today, our panel includes Jason Hessler, Deputy Commissioner for the Permits and Litigation with the Baltimore Department of Housing and Community Development, Tammy Daniels, Director of Demolition and Interim General Counsel with the Detroit Land Bank Authority, and Peyton Hines, Associate Director of Michigan Initiatives at the Center for Community Progress. Jason will lead off the presentation and will be followed in the order introduced. We will then go to some of your questions before wrapping up. We hope that you leave this conversation with new knowledge and considerations that advance responsible demolition practices in your communities. And finally, to continue your engagement in this discussion, we would encourage you your use of the hashtag CaseyChat. Now, let me turn the conversation over to Jason.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Just a little bit of background about Baltimore. Baltimore is 90 square miles of mostly land, about 11 square miles underwater, with a population of just over 600,000 people. We've had a significant population loss since our peak in the 1950s, where we were just under 1 million people. We like to say that 300,000 people left Baltimore, but they forgot to take their homes with them. As of this morning, we have 16,779 open vacant building notices. These are unoccupied properties that were found open to casual entry or unfit in some way, or maintenance was so lacking that they were declared a nuisance. These homes are placed on a regular inspection schedule where we look to see if the properties need to be secured, cut, cleaned, or any other action taken. These properties become a significant resource drain and a plague on our communities. We have all styles of housing in Baltimore, but part of what makes us be called Charm City are our row homes. We may have more row homes than any other city in America, They're prevalent throughout the city, but they're heavily concentrated in the same areas where we've had the high levels of population drop. These are areas surrounding the downtown and to the east and west. Our row houses present a particular challenge when they fall into disrepair, because in many cases, it's not the whole block that becomes vacant. It's one or two on the end, and then a couple occupied, and then a couple more vacant, then one without a roof, and so on down the line. So it becomes quite a challenge. So we have developed a very sophisticated community development and code enforcement program to try and combat vacancy. We use housing typology and other data, GSI mapping, and tools like receivership to strategically combat vacant blight and promote redevelopment. Demolition is one of the tools that we use. We use demolition both in emergency situations as well as blight elimination. Historically, Baltimore has had a limited demolition budget. This was split between the emergencies, the blight elimination, and stabilization work. Just to give you a sense of cost, an average row house, two-story row house, would cost us about $14,000 to demolish. If that row house requires a wall or two walls, that price tag can jump $20,000 to $40,000. With this type of cost, historically, we were only doing about 150 demolitions per year, especially back around 2000 when the EBDI protocols were launched. We were only doing about 150 demolitions a year, and the only other significant demolitions in the city would be if there was some sort of large development project. So there wasn't a ton of demo going on in Baltimore. The East Baltimore Development Initiative, EBDI, was founded in 2003 to revitalize, rebuild, and re-energize East Baltimore. The original EBDI footprint, which is seen on this map here, is anchored by Johns Hopkins Hospital, which is at the bottom of the slide, kind of in gray. This was an 88-acre site. It's mostly comprised of blocks of row homes. The vacancy in that area was over 56% at the time. So it was going to be a major demolition and rebuilding project in a predominantly residential area. And the public-private partnership looked to acquire the properties, relocate the residents, and then demolish whole blocks. This was going to be spread out over the course of a number of years, done in stages. So it was clear that residents would be living within not only the footprint, but also the surrounding area, and also traveling through the area to go to school, work, and the like over a number of years. And we were talking here hundreds of row homes that were going to be demolished. So the community really stepped up and demanded that precautions be taken to protect the health of those living in and around the area. The Coalition to End Childhood-Led Poisoning led the charge with all of the EBDI partners participating, including Baltimore State Department of Housing and Community Development. The Baltimore EBDI the Baltimore or EBDI demolition model was developed as a result of all this. On the next slide, you see that the top items are listed here. I'm just going to go through and kind of cover, I'm not going to read the list, but just cover some of the main items and break them down for you. Fencing. I know when I was a kid, one of my favorite places to play in was a construction yard, but that was usually new construction and not demolition sites. The new construction sites have clear hazards. Unfortunately, demolition sites, beyond the clear hazards, also have the unseen hazards of lead dust. Lead dust that can be picked up by kids playing there, as well as carried home to the kids at home that can't travel around. So dust is a very important thing to watch out for, and the fencing actually helps keep people outside the area. And I'll talk about other fencing processes later in the presentation. Notice was a key part, providing notice to the community of when the demolition is going to occur. In Baltimore, it gets pretty hot in the summer, and the row homes, particularly in this area, generally didn't have any air conditioning. So it was very important to give prior notice so people knew to close their windows during the demolition on their block or in their area, cover vegetable gardens, or maybe bring in planters, keep the kids from playing in that area that day. And so without proper notice and educational materials, that was a problem. Testing and removal of any high-risk items. So we'd test the demo sites, remove any asbestos materials like shingle, siding, tile, and then also there was removal in some cases of window frames, door frames, and other high-level, lead-level items from the house. Using the picker method, so getting away from the wrecking ball style demo that you would see in, on TV or in the commercials, and really just picking apart the building, creating less dust to start with, and then debris removal, making sure the debris was wet when it's being removed, making sure that the trucks are covered coming to and from the site to prevent the dust from spreading throughout the neighborhood, using clean topsoil at the end of the project to make sure that when kids do run out there and start playing, that they're not playing in some nasty old demo debris mixed in with the dirt and everything else. And then the most important thing, as you see in the photo there on the slide, is wetting. Residential homes in Baltimore tended to have lead paint, asbestos, and potentially other heavy metals. By wetting the building during the demo and the debris removal, the amount of lead and asbestos was decreased down to safe levels. Wetting is the #1 thing you can do to reduce the hazards presented by lead paint and asbestos. This is usually referred to as the wet-wet protocol, meaning wet during the demo and wet during the debris removal. I would say you really should think about it as the wet process, and somewhat of that is the wetter the better, but you want to make sure the site is wet before you even begin demo. That means if it's possible to wet the surfaces on the inside of the buildings by spraying through the open windows and doors or holes in the roof, even if you have to start the demo a little bit and then spray inside and then continue the demo while spraying during it, like you see in the photo, that's going to be the best method to reduce the amount of dust, and by reducing the dust, you're limiting the spread of any potential hazards. So the protocols that were developed back in around 2004 with the EBDI program led to the City of Baltimore adopting a majority of the methods, both in our city demo contracts. At the time we were doing about 150, like I said, but also in our 2007 building code update. We adopted these EBDI methods and required anyone in Baltimore City that's doing demo to follow the protocols. The main things that we adopted was the wetting during demolition. We require a mandatory pre-demo meeting where the inspector meets with the demo contractor and goes over the site plan, make sure there's proper access to water, proper securing of the site. They go over the signage requirements and notice requirements and make sure that they understand what the protocols are for when the demo starts and while it progresses with the debris removal and everything else. That mandatory pre-demo meeting is followed by a mandatory first-day inspection. So the demo permit holder is required to call in for a city inspector to be present on the day that they intend to start demo. And that city inspector makes sure that the demo site is the way that the site plan and everything else laid out and everything that was discussed, and that the hoses are hooked up and working, and they can then start demoing and wetting down the site and demoing. We also increased the size of our demolition signs and specified that the timing for when they had to be out, demo signs must be up 5 days before the demo, but no longer than 10 days before. And we created that window so that the sense of urgency existed. If somebody sees a sign up and it's up there for a year or even a couple months before the demo actually begins, they tend not to be as aware of it and then leave their doors open or windows open on the day of the demo. So we have 4-foot by 3-foot signs that are yellow with 2-inch lettering at all the demo sites, and every building is marked with a sign. From there, Baltimore started looking more into our demolition stuff, and we actually developed a deconstruction model, which on our next slide, you see a photo of a couple guys exploring a house and pointing out different parts of the house that can be salvaged. This was in 2014 when we launched a pilot project with Humanum and their subsidiary Details. They won a contract with the city to begin doing deconstruction, where they would go in, they examine the property, they determine what can be salvaged out of the property, and it's not just items that can be recycled, like the metal pipes or things of that nature, but also what can be reused. So they would be looking to take down bricks, cleaning them up, palletizing them, and reselling them, wood flooring, timbers, architectural details, and other items that have a value in a secondary market. Once the deconstruction is complete, then they would follow the normal demolition protocols in tearing down the rest of the property and removing it. But at that point, they've taken a lot of the debris that would normally have been hauled off to either a lesser use or to a landfill and put it back in the market. And they've been successful in doing that while also creating jobs. They have created their process as a reentry training program for individuals returning to the community. They've been very successful at that, not only in giving them jobs and giving them training, but actually helping them build a future career. They've also been successful in their spin-off business, which is brick and board, where the salvage material is not just put to use in construction, but has also been used decorative in businesses and in other houses and turned into furniture. So it's been a huge success. And we've grown our deconstruction pilot from 50 units, 50 buildings, where we're looking at 300 buildings this year and next year, so 600 total in the next 2 years, which is just outstanding. From there, Project Core presented itself. So the governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, had pitched an idea in 2015, which was just after the civil unrest in Baltimore with the Freddie Gray murder. He wanted to do something to help fight blight or eliminate blight, spark redevelopment, and combat the violence that was in some neighborhoods in the city. And so the idea of Project Core, a city-state partnership to eliminate 4,000 units by the end of fiscal year 19, took place. With the leadership here at the Baltimore City Department of Housing, we saw this as an opportunity to possibly raise the bar with the EBDI protocols. These protocols were 10 years old, and we thought that revisiting the guidelines and working in with the Project Core specs, we could test out some things, see what could be changed, and then amend our code and future demo contracts based on that. The Project Core specs, some major changes from how demos done in other places in the city prior to this, included pole-driven fencing. They use 8-foot-high fences that are fully windscreened so that it catches some of the dust that the water isn't suppressing. Increased to a minimum of 2 hoses during the demo and debris removal. They use that as necessary depending on the site to reduce the amount of water, but they have 2 hoses. In the beginning phases, they did air quality monitoring to see what kind of changes these protocols made, and they did increased notification by mailing in the area, with not just mailing to the neighbors, but the surrounding blocks with information about Project Core, also job information, and some other outreach materials. And they were committed to studying the results of the monitoring, which is important to test your theories. With the air quality measuring that was done, we found 2 interesting things, I think, that are important to pass on. The first is the protocols required that demolition be suspended should there be winds of 15 miles an hour or higher, sustained winds of 15 miles an hour or higher. And on a couple of occasions where the winds started getting high in those areas with the testing, you could see increase in the dust that was collected by the monitoring systems and higher on those days. So it was very important to shut down operations when there were sustained winds over 15 miles per hour. The other issue, and I don't have the exact numbers, but when there was low humidity days, the dust tended to travel a bit further than on normal days. Fortunately, in Baltimore, that's not really an issue. We don't have low humidity days. We have 110% humidity days. So with Project Core, we're kind of now moving on to the next stages. So I said earlier we were doing about 150 demos a year. With the mortgage foreclosure settlement, we were able to jump up the city demolition with $9 million from the mortgage foreclosure settlement. And then the mayor of Baltimore has committed to funding demolition and stabilization efforts at $10 million a year. So you can see from this chart, fiscal year 15, we did just over 250 demos, and it's been growing. We launched Project Core in fiscal year 17, really, and started identifying properties, doing acquisition, relocation, completing our due process, because the majority of what we're demolishing is not city-owned property. These are vacant, abandoned, derelict properties that are privately held. So we're not taking title to them before we demo them, but rather completing the due process legal authority to take the properties down and lien it. And often the city will come back and take title to these properties, but initially we are not the owners of the majority of the properties. So the influx of that money was great, and we were able to step up our demos. We will be over 1,000 demos very soon for fiscal year 20. We're going to hit over 1,000 in a fiscal year. We might hit it in 19. We'll see how the year goes, but we're going to get pretty close based on our projections. What we've learned from the EBDI model and the demo there, and then our Project Core demos and the study there, is that there are some changes we can still make and still improve on. So right now we're fortunate we are in our 3-year cycle for adopting new codes. We're waiting for the state of Maryland to adopt it, and then local jurisdictions have the opportunity to adopt and modify. So here in Baltimore, we've already started drafting what our modifications to the ICC code that the state adopts and then we adopt in turn. We're looking to modify the demolition sections as well as some other sections, but in the demo sections, we're going to be looking to modify some of those requirements. And then we are also in our 4th year of our demo contracts. We don't intend to extend it in that last 5th year of the contract. We intend to put out new contracts based off of the items that we've learned through Project Core and all this. And so all of the city demos coming up once we get this new contract in place will also have higher standards than in the past. Main things that we're looking for there is improvements to the fencing, changes to our fill requirements, new standards for wall construction. We build weather walls to protect the remaining occupied buildings on the block, and some additional wetting procedures. So that's where Baltimore started and where we're headed. Thank you.
Thanks, Tammy.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tammy Daniels. I am the Director of Demolition for the Detroit Land Bank Authority. And I'm going to take a little time this afternoon to kind of describe Detroit's efforts at blight remediation and returning properties to productive use. The Detroit Land Bank Authority is a unique organization, as we are the only city-run land bank in the state of Michigan. That is in large part due to the scale of blight that we are trying to battle here in Detroit. We battle blight with a number of different tools. Demolition is one of the larger ones, but we also sell auction properties. We have a rehab program, and we also attempt to fight blight by holding private property owners responsible. I'll kind of go through some super high-level information about our different programs. Demolition. we have demolished through the Detroit Land Bank over 11,000 structures since we have been operating since about 2014. We run the largest demolition program in the country, and again, that is largely due to the size of our problem. So the land bank specifically has demolished over 11,000 properties, but the city also has a city-run demolition program. So collectively between the two programs, we have demolished almost 17,000 properties since 2014. That problem did not happen overnight. It's been decades in the making, and we are attempting as safely and as expeditiously as possible to clear the slate and clear out all the blight. So let me talk about our demolition program. So as I indicated, we have the largest demolition program in the country. We have, from the beginning of the program, implemented as many safety protocols as we could to ensure that the community that we're operating in, they are as safe as possible given what's going on. So much like Jason's recitation of safety protocols, we also employ the wet method. We also employ fencing. Our notification protocols have been enhanced over the last year because we too are focused not only on the abatement remediation of asbestos-containing material, but also lead. So over the last year, we have increased our safety protocols to one. We've looked at the studies and found that in certain areas within the city, there are certain areas that have higher levels of elevated blood lead level, and in those areas, in those zip codes, we cease all demolition activity between May 1 and September 30th during the summer, because the thought is that's when the kids are out playing and they are more susceptible to exposure. So from May 1 to September 30th, we cease all demolition in the areas of the city that have the highest percentages of elevated blood lead levels. We have absolutely beefed up and enhanced our notification. We notify neighbors. If you are within 400 feet of a demolition site, 2 weeks before the demolition, you get a notice, a flyer that a demolition is going to take place within the next 2 weeks. Within 72 hours of the demolition, if you are within 200 feet of the demolition site, we put door hangers on your door so that you know that a demolition is going to take place. We put yard signs on the actual site so that people know this is the house that is going to come down in the very near future. The wet method. We have now required our contractors to use 2 hoses during the demolition process. They are required to punch a hole in the roof and let the water flow into the structure for 5 minutes before they take the house down, with the goal of wetting the structure thoroughly so we can abate fugitive dust. As we have heard and know, fugitive dust is a concern not only for asbestos, but also for lead particles floating in the air. We require demolition be halted altogether if wind speeds exceed 20 miles per hour. So we shut all demolition operations down in those particular instances. We also have implemented, as another safety protocol, post-abatement verifications. We send our environmental contractors back in after the house has been abated, but prior to demolition, to make sure that everything that was identified in our environmental survey has been removed from the house, so that when we take it down, we know that we are taking down a house that is, free from asbestos-containing materials. I'm trying to think of other things. It's an ever-changing landscape. We have very robust protocols when it comes to backfill materials that can be placed in the hole. Our scope is very, the scope of services that we provide to our demo contractors is very detailed. And so, again, the goal is to return these properties to productive use, to make the neighborhood a better place, and to provide as safe an environment while the demolition is going on as we possibly can. That is on the actual field operations. I will also note that we have a whole team of field liaisons, as we call them, who are on site for the demolition. For 100% of our demolitions, we have somebody standing on site watching to make sure that things are going as planned. From the point of the demolition to the knockdown, there's somebody watching it. We are moving toward trying to, as our funding continues, trying to enhance those operations to make sure that we can, deploy the necessary field liaisons to be in the field and watching the load out of the debris and to make sure that everything is going as planned. There have been quite a few changes just administratively to our program. We now at the Land Bank handle the procurement portion of the process. So we have streamlined the procurement process. We found that it was a way to ensure the most competitive pricing. We did receive over $265 million from the federal government in order to effectuate these demolitions that are taking place in the city. And so in order to do that, we needed to be we have a Herculean task. That $265 million goes a long way, but it doesn't get the job completely done. So we had to be very strategic and find ways to make that dollar go further. And some of the things that we've done here at the Land Bank, we've streamlined the procurement process so that we release packages of properties every 2 weeks. Between the biggest package is 50, we have some packages as small as 5 or 7 properties. The smaller packages are geared toward the smaller contractors who may not be able to do a 50 property package, because what we require is bonding and insurance. And so those companies that are smaller, that are trying to grow, they can participate in the program too, as long as they can meet the requirements of experience and financial stability. So we have smaller packages that gives us a much more diverse pool of demolition contractors. It allows, again, the smaller companies to participate. We've gone a little bit more high tech with our procurement. We do virtual bid openings so that contractors can watch from the computer to see what the bids are and to understand how contractors are bidding, how you need to bid in order to be competitive. And it has helped us to keep our properties flowing, because I think, as I said previously, we have a huge inventory of properties that require demolition. We have currently, like I said, we've done over 11,000, but we have a little over 8,000 more that we need to do in order to remove all of the properties. We have 8,534 properties that have been identified as blighted structures that need to come down. So soon our demolition program will transfer completely over to city demolition, and the Land Bank will no longer be focusing on demolition, but the demolitions will continue because we do still have a large inventory of properties that do need to come down. And so as we move toward the wind down of the Land Bank's demolition program, I want to focus on some of the positive things that have come from the demolitions. And as you see on the screen now, you see properties that were a part of our demolition program and the fruits of the labor. So how we turned these properties into productive use. This property on Minnock, we demolished it. It was the picture is dated in 2016, and now it is a beautiful community garden. The entire neighborhood can come there. They can get free fresh fruits and vegetables, and this is one of the prouder ways that the land bank has, in my opinion, turned this property into productive use. If we go to the next slide, you can see this again, the before picture of a dilapidated property where it looks like the front porch is falling down to this beautiful gated driveway that's attached to the house next to it. Side lots are that's a huge way that the land bank returns our properties to productive use. When we demolish a house, the neighbor, who in this case had to live next to this blighted structure, they qualify. If the house is occupied and they live in that house, they can buy that lot for $100 and do what this particular property owner did, turn it into this beautiful yard. So the person who had to suffer and live next to the blighted structure now gets the benefit. For $100, they can buy that lot and do what they want to do with it. You go to the next slide. This is not a demo site, but this is another way that the land bank turns properties back to productive use. We have a program called Rehab and Ready, where we work with our partners at Quicken Loans, and we take properties in neighborhoods that are on the cusp, and we totally renovate them and sell them. In this house, quite frankly, they did a fabulous job on it. We sell this property, and it's not in an effort to make a profit. It's in an effort to build the neighborhood comps up so that you then have this house sold for what I'm not sure the price of it, but it then allows people in the neighborhood, it drives up property values, and that's the goal. The goal is not for the land bank to make money, but to help drive up property values in these areas. So we totally renovate the house from the beginning to the end and then sell it. And so in closing, these are the ways that we work at the land bank to return properties to productive use. These are the 7 options for property disposition: auction, own it now, community partners. Community partners is just a program where faith-based organizations can purchase property and they get a discount because they're a faith-based organization. Economic development, Rehab and Ready is the program I just mentioned previously. Buyback is a program where someone who has maybe lost their house for tax foreclosure, or they were unfortunately renting from someone who didn't pay their taxes, they can purchase the house. They have to go through a program, but they can buy a house and become a homeowner. And then side lots. Side lots are, we do have 66,000 plus vacant lots in our inventory. A number of them are a result of demolition. But again, people who are living next to occupied homeowner who lives next to a vacant lot and then can buy that lot for $100 and turn it into an extended backyard or a garden or a driveway. These are things, we've seen this happen over and over and over again in the city. We see the fruits of our labor here at the land bank. And so we are very excited at the path that the city is taking, and we feel that in a very short period of time, you will see even more substantial and significant revitalization happening in the city of Detroit. Thanks
very much, Tammy. Peyton?
Good afternoon. My name is Peyton Hines with the Center for Community Progress. For those of you who aren't yet familiar with our organization, we're a national nonprofit. We work with communities across the country to address widespread vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated property. We work with communities in developing or improving their systems and policies to better tackle vacancy and abandonment. And we do this through three primary areas: our direct technical assistance to communities, our education and training, such as learning exchanges between cities, and our major national conference, as well as through various policy and research efforts. And it was through our technical assistance and educational work that we've had the opportunity to work with both Baltimore and Detroit over the years. So it's a real pleasure to be on a panel with each city as they share their practices for responsible demolition. Both are truly national leaders in their efforts to make demolition safer in their communities. And I can't stress enough that these cities have also taken on the challenge of responsible demolition at scales most cities haven't had to face, and both with an older building stock and therefore greater presence of lead, asbestos, and other contaminants that they've had to address citywide. The Center for Community Progress, we had the opportunity to bring a group of Detroit stakeholders to Baltimore about 5 years ago, and to also contribute to a number of other gatherings with local partners in order for Detroit to learn more about Baltimore's responsible demolition protocol. As Jason shared, Baltimore implemented the wet method, soil replacement, and fencing, and a number of other practices to remove or to prevent the spread of harmful contaminants. Detroit implemented those tactics and also looked for new ways to continue improving upon practices. And they set out to implement them at an unprecedented scale and within an unprecedented time frame, which of course presents a whole new set of challenges beyond just the increased cost of doing demolition in a safer way. These experiences and the local impact studies that were performed helped to inform a number of adjustments to the program along the way. Both cities have and they continue to make improvements to their programs and look for new ways of doing that work. Nationally, we've seen improvements in demolition practices in more cities looking to deconstruction. Though the need still exists for structure removal, not just in Baltimore and Detroit, but across the country, much of the funding available to do this work is limited. The bulk of funding for demolition has come from federal sources. For example, the hardest hit funds have been a primary source of funding used in Detroit. That being contracted out and the program now being wound down without additional U.S. Treasury money coming down the pike, that of course is a threat to continuing the work. So as both cities can attest, doing demolition the responsible way of course adds to the cost of that demolition, and the lack of funding could put additional pressures on cities. For that reason, cities will not only need to look for other sources of funding, but will need to be even more strategic about how and where they're removing structures. This will mean for many communities a better understanding of their local market conditions, more robust data systems, strong partnerships, and more strategic alignment of demolition with broader citywide revitalization efforts. This need to be even more strategic reinforces the importance of cross-city learning. One of the best ways to advance this work is by sharing the strategies, the missteps, the lessons learned in order to shorten the learning curve for other cities and to help them avoid some of those same costly mistakes along the way. This helps to ensure that cities can be as strategic and smart about their approach as possible. The story of Detroit and Baltimore represent just one example of how peer learning can lead to important changes in practices that further public health outcomes and essentially accomplish more with less. And fortunately, each city has made it a point to share their lessons learned and best practices across a number of national forums to help other cities make improvements as well. I think it's wonderful that the Annie Casey Foundation is providing a national platform like this for sharing these practices, and I really hope that others will continue to support cross-city learning efforts to make these opportunities more available in the future and to more cities. Whether it's through the peer-to-peer learning, conferences, or webinars like this, all of those outlets help to foster this kind of cross-city learning and collaborative problem solving that really is so critical to the work. Removing dangerous structure is, of course, just one piece of the efforts to revitalize the community. Ensuring demolition is done correctly in the first place to minimize contaminants in the remaining site drastically reduces the initial environmental risk. But post-demolition investment can be just as critical to the health and the safety outcomes of a community. So we shouldn't just be thinking about how demolition itself can be done in a safer, healthier, more responsible way, but also be thinking about that next step. So how can we leverage the land remaining from structure removal to support a healthier and a more vibrant community? There's an opportunity to use new vacant land to achieve a number of community goals, such as benefiting the environment, supporting community health, stabilizing neighborhoods, strengthening the local economy. There are a variety of vacant land reuse types that can help to achieve these different desired community goals. And they range from the more passive uses that require minimal site preparation and maintenance to your more active uses that require a greater investment of resources. Just as some examples, if the goal of the community is to really make environmental improvements, then cities might think about installing native plants known for extracting contaminants from the soil. They may be thinking about plants that help restore the natural habitat of certain animals and insects that are important to a healthier environment. They may look at a variety of different tactics ranging in intensity to help mitigate stormwater runoff that often overwhelms sewer systems of many cities. If the community is prioritizing community health, they may be thinking about things like tree installations that minimize dust and provide cleaner air. For stabilizing neighborhoods, they may be thinking about installing more active uses like playgrounds, art installations, and gathering spaces that really center around fostering that community interaction and make a neighborhood feel more cohesive. And if the goal is to really strengthen the local economy, cities may look more to renewable energy production, operating a land-based business that produces food and other goods at a larger scale of production and sale. So many of these interventions, of course, serve more than one of these larger community goals, and they can be implemented on a variety of scales to accomplish these goals. From the lot level, as Tammy illustrated in describing Detroit's side lot program, to multiple city blocks. The scale, of course, depends on that reuse type, the available land, and community priorities. For example, in areas where the demand for new construction may overall be limited, cities can be thinking about how that land can be strategically assembled to provide opportunities for much larger scale reuse options. So the point here is to really illustrate that we should be intentional about the land reuse interventions we encourage, where and at what scale we encourage them in order to promote a healthy and vibrant community. So while demolition isn't exactly a rosy subject or an intervention that any city really looks forward to undertaking, the opportunity that exists for the remaining sites offer cities a chance to really rethink their future landscapes in order to fulfill a variety of community goals. And that, I think, is something that we can all really get excited about.
Thanks very much, Peyton, for that. And thank you all, Jason and Tammy, for your comments. We do have a host of questions, and we've got about 11 minutes to jump into it, so I'm going to move into it pretty quickly. Some of them are questions or clarification, And first one came up during Jason's presentation and discussion, and it was really around whether the $40,000 for demolition, and is that for properties next to an occupied property?
Correct, yeah. So that would be where we're taking down one or multiple row houses, but then leaving row houses either on one side or both sides up because they're occupied.
And then and actually another follow-up question was, and Tammy, I know you mentioned this, but I think there was looking for some clarification on what kind of notification residents may have gotten about the potential hazards that are surrounding them when the demolition notices come out. Are there any sort of notices about hazardous materials or hazardous substances in those buildings?
So as I indicated, there are flyers that are placed on the doors of residents that are between 200 and 400 feet away from the demo sites, notifying them that a demo is taking place and that they should, close their windows and doors on the day of the demolition because of, fugitive dust. They are made aware of the lead issue. If the house is abated prior to, in most cases, they are abated prior to the demolition, and so that is not an issue. In the case where there's an emergency demolition or there's a partial order where they could not remove all of the asbestos-containing material, special protocols are taken to ensure that the asbestos-containing particles are abated. I'm sorry, not abated, but are contained. So all of that is a part of the notification process that is done prior to and the demolition process.
Okay, Jason, same thing in Baltimore?
Most of the notice goes out as general, just to the hazards of demolition, and then all of our properties are tested by a third-party company. We have a separate company that does any remediation that's necessary, and then the original testing company comes back in to check it. And so when the remediation is going on, there's not additional notice to neighbors, but the remediation is done really, properties, the sections that are being remediated are sealed off to eliminate the risk of fugitive dust or other issues.
So. Great. So Peyton mentioned, and both of you actually detailed, that some of the money comes from both federal and from state sources, and those have been sort of fairly robust, especially in the case of Detroit where there was a lot of federal money that went in. But there was a question that came up regarding the timetable for completion of demolition, and I understand that this may be a moving target, but have either of your cities established sort of a goal point of time in mind that you would have accomplished or met the goals of your demolition efforts?
So this is Jason. We don't have a particular goal or timeline. What we've been doing in the last 7 years is really looking for really strategic demolitions and whole block resolutions. So the ability to clear an entire block or square block so that it promotes some sort of future development, whether it's green space park or a skyscraper, something other than the vacant buildings that are there. And so in trying to look at that whole block solution, we're losing targets, which is a good thing, and we're shifting gears a bit and doing a lot more stabilization, and I see that as kind of our future, is where we're demoing less and putting roofs and making structurally sound some of these mid-block vacants instead of creating a gap in the block, stabilizing it, putting a little bit of investment, using receivership to get it in the hands of somebody that can rehab it. So we've got a big problem and a long future. Lots of job security.
For Detroit, so we have a couple of timelines. So there's just the inherent danger that these buildings pose in the neighborhood. And so our goal and our charge from our mayor is to get these houses down and get these neighborhoods to be as safe as possible, as quickly as possible. while at the same time ensuring that we're doing it as safely as possible. But because we do receive a tremendous amount of funding from the federal government, we have deadlines of December 30th, 2020 to spend all of our HHF money. But at the same time, the city is ramping up the city program so that the remaining, 8,500 demos, those will take place under the city program, where there's still a sense of urgency because we want our neighborhoods to be safe, but there's not a timeline on the dollars and when they need to be spent.
Right. All right. Thank you. Next question, and I guess for both cities, doing this more environmentally sound method must cost more. Did you come up with a cost differential, and how have you determined, and Peyton, I know we talked about this previously, how have you determined sort of the value for doing better?
Is Jason on? I can't tell.
Yep.
Okay. I don't have an exact cost differential, but it really comes down to it doesn't matter anymore. It needs to be done in the fashion that we're doing it to protect the residents and the image of the city. It's safety first. So it's the way we're doing it. We wouldn't go back, and we probably should have been doing it a lot sooner.
Tammy or Peyton, I mean, I know somebody had a great phrase for this.
So for Detroit, because again, the HHF program, there are restrictions on how we spend dollars. There is a $25,000 maximum per property allotment, and so that had in the past been a restriction on what we could demolish, but because the administration recognized the importance of getting these blighted structures down, we supplement. There are a significant number of homes that, because of either the size or because of the amount of asbestos-containing material, that they are extremely expensive and they exceed that $25,000 HHF cap. We are able to supplement the removal and demolition of those structures with city funding. So it had been an impediment, but it is not currently.
Okay. So there was a couple of questions about sort of contracting and jobs, and there was also one about the role of philanthropy in supporting deconstruction. To that question, there was a seed investment that Casey had done in Baltimore some years ago around a deconstruction demonstration that I think eventually led to the growth of what is now a social venture called Details in Baltimore that is doing the deconstruction work. So you can see that how, in certain ways, the seed investment can actually lead to something larger. But in the case of Jason and Tammy, I guess a little bit more about how you contract. I mean, Tammy, you talked about putting out bids of different sizes for different contractors to get in. And do you notice a change in the number of jobs in doing more robust demolition than you have in sort of the traditional method? Are there more FTEs on the site?
So let's see. So we have, like, as I indicated, we try to be mindful of the different sizes of demolition contractors, doing work for our program. And although, because it is federally funded, we are prohibited from giving additional credit for certain of those, how can I put this? We are prohibited from giving geographic preferences. We are prohibited from giving preferences to individuals who hire Detroit residents to work on the project. However, we do monitor to make sure that we have a robust number of contractors and that a significant amount of the money goes to Detroit-based business. And we monitor it. We can't require it, but we do monitor it, and we know that about almost 30% of the monies have gone to Detroit-based businesses, to local businesses. And I have regular communication with our contractors just to understand what the demographic of their employees are, and they understand the importance of hiring locally. On the city side, with the city demolition work, they can give those type of preferences. And so most of the contractors that do work for the HHF program also work on the city side. So I benefit from what the city can do that I can't. Hope that answers your question.
I think it makes it clear enough for my purposes, and hopefully it extends to the folks on the call. We are at the time, so let me give my thanks to Jason, Tammy, and Peyton for their insights and the difference that their leadership efforts are making for the well-being of children in our communities. There was someone who else asked a question. This webinar will be webcast, and it will be available soon on the Annie Casey Foundation's website at www.aecf.org. And on the behalf of the presenters and the foundation, I would like to thank you all for your engagement and hope for your participation in more Community Matters webinars in 2019. Thanks so much, and have a great afternoon.